Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. It comes with no standard job description, yet it's probably the most critical job a person could have, being a parent. What do you do when the values and mores you taught your daughter are not in sync with her new best friend? How do you answer the tough questions, like what is war, or is there really a heaven? And then, as an African-American parent, what do you say when your son asks why Jamal and his cousin got shot? How do you comfort your daughter when she comes home crying because someone called her black and ugly? Stay tuned for another view as we talk about parenting African American style right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. So glad you could join us on this rainy Friday, but that's okay because it's the weekend. I want to say a very special shout out and hello to Jasmine Strong. Jasmine is a former intern for Another View. She was at ODU and now she's at the University of Maryland. So she popped in to say hello. And so we just want to say hi, Jasmine. Thanks so much for joining us. According to numerous reports, child rearing in African American families differs significantly from white, Asian, and Hispanic families. Not only is race a factor, but so are social, economic, and familial differences. Statistically, it's almost even between black children being raised by a single parent versus a dual parent household, 41 and 40% respectively, with the remaining 19% of black children being raised by one parent and an extended family member. But those are just numbers. What else is involved in raising an African American child in today's world? Joining us to talk about it and to also answer any questions you may have about parenting is one of our favorite guests on Another View, Ms. Alvean Lyons, who is a marriage and family consultant, parent educator, and relationship expert. Alvean, how are you?
I am fantastic. Always glad to be here
Absolutely.
With you guys.
It's so good to have you back. It's been a while. So we talk about, and we titled this show Parenting African American Style, and we kind of chuckled a little bit. But in reality, you say, and others have said too, that there is a difference in the style of parenting. Talk to me about that.
It really is the messaging that we have to do that's very different. And I love the statistics that you brought up previously in terms of the differences in the way that African Americans may have to approach it versus other cultures approaching it. And the unique thing that exists within the African American community is that we are actively still working on trying to do it better than the generation before. Where with other cultures, you're dealing more with the maintenance of the expectation, the achievement, where we already are. But for African Americans, we're still actively on the climb. So what it is that we're saying to our kids is very different than what you probably will hear in other households, because we're still trying to improve on something. So most of us are either one generation into academic achievement at the collegiate level. So the messages that we're giving to our kids about the need for academic performance are very direct messages. They're not assumed messages. Where if you're in a family where everybody went to college, it was just the common experience, then it is assumed that you're going to go to college. So in an African American household, particularly an educated one, you'll hear very direct messages about you need to go to college. This is what you have to do. If you want to have a career instead of a job, you have to get an education. Understand that you're going to have to be better than to just be considered as good as. They're very direct messages that are sent. So the psychology in the way that we have to raise our children tends to be more direct than you will find in other households.
And do you think that is because beyond the racial aspect of it, it's also because of the socioeconomic climb within the country that a lot of black parents are trying to achieve?
Absolutely.
At this point?
And I think what we would definitely agree about when we look at the statistics is that those things are almost functioning in perfect tandem. Where we are socially is directed to where we are economically, which is often directed to where we are in terms of our achievement. So, and when I say achievement, I'm talking about the exposures that we've had in terms of academics. in particular, and not necessarily just traditional collegiate experiences, but training and that kind of exposure that allows us to be progressive in terms of our ability to achieve upwardly mobile, if we want to use other terminology for that.
How much does society's perception of African American families also play into our parenting? Because honestly, as doing the research for this show today, if you look through most of the materials, they always only talk about single women with children, broken families. You never get the full, two-parent household. Hey, we're middle class, we're moving up, we're doing just like everybody else.
And, and that's so valuable that you bring that into the conversation, because that also has a lot to do with the way in which we have to parent, the way in which we have to deliver messages, because we're also working against the script and the stereotype, where you won't see that in another household. You have the privilege of being able to not think about how you are perceived, not think about what the stereotype is about your culture. It is the privilege of ignorance, for lack of a better term, like that we get to be blind to it. We get to allow ourselves to not think about all of the parameters that exist within who we are and how we are received from the general public, that being. So it's a really interesting experience. And if we're not careful about how we raise our children, we risk either having them ill prepared for what it is that they're going to experience, or have them biased about how they're going to experience the process. And it's such a delicate line to walk, because you want your children to be very aware of what it is that they may meet out there, but you don't want them jaded walking out of that house either. So it's this fine line we have to constantly walk.
And and that's a really good point, because also I was going to say, how do you respond then to people who say, well, if you're going to talk about race in your household and talk about what they may expect, you're just perpetuating that experience as opposed to trying to make it better.
Yeah, and I know that, and it's a mixed bag where that's concerned, because you are working to equip your child. It's no different than if you tell your child that, when you're getting ready to walk across the street, look both ways, know that cars won't always see you, so on and so forth, because you're preparing them. Not because you're anticipating they're going to get hit by a car, nor are you hoping that will be the case, but you want them prepared so that in the event that there is a car that does not see them, they know how to protect themselves. And we have that same responsibility as African American parents, that we are not looking for the disaster. We don't even want the disaster, but we want to make sure that, God forbid, you are forced to address some issues that we were hoping we were post-racial, we were past these places in our lives, that you know how to handle that without that getting into you, because there's a difference between what is around you versus what is inside of you. And what we have to do is make sure that we don't put those things inside of our child, but we equip them for what they're going to experience around them.
Okay, so as before we become a parent then, what kind of soul searching, what do we need to do to think about how we're going to handle those things? Because I don't think at the point where your child is looking up at you with those beautiful brown eyes and asking the question, that's the time for you to try to decide how you're going to handle this.
Well, I don't think that you can ever be fully prepared for what your kids are going to come home with, because we can intellectualize what it is that we think we're going to do, how we're going to approach various things. But there's something very different than when your baby comes home and says that somebody said this. Even the script that you wrote in your head about how you were going to prepare your child for that moment, it's amazing how the emotional tie that exists in that experience makes all of that go straight out the window. And you literally have to regroup to remember we are not playing for the short game. Because in the short game, I want everybody to know that don't you ever do this, don't you ever say this. That's the short game. But does that really equip your child for what you're going to need for them? Are you writing a check that child is going to have to cash later? Because sometimes when we respond, we may be right in the way that we respond and have the right to respond that way, but we're not going to be present with our kids as they navigate through the collateral damage of our response, particularly when you have experiences, for instance, when you have African American children and predominantly white environments, for instance, and something takes place in that environment. Well, when you tell your child how you're going to respond to that, you have to think about the fact that you will not be there with your child after they respond. So what do you want that experience to be like for your child when you are not able to protect them or intervene in the situation?
I thought it was very interesting, the young man at UVA that has been all in the news this week with the violence that he experienced by being handcuffed by the ABC police.
Right.
And his mother lives in Chicago. But he has been very careful, I think, to be very inclusive in his discussion, or through his lawyer. I mean, I know he hasn't spoken, but it seems to me that he and his family, I would assume, have put some real thought behind how he is going to publicly respond. And it seems to coincide, if you believe what you read about his background and his history, it seems to coincide with that same line of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And being a child of that kind of environment, where I was generally the only African-American child in any of my classes. So I had that experience. We grew up in an exclusively white neighborhood. All of that was true. Those realities, being sensitive to not playing what people will call the race card, recognizing that in any time that you make it an us and them issue, you are not going to get the support that you need on an issue that deserves inclusive interaction. We need everybody involved in this process. So if I want both of us at the table, I can't have a conversation that says that you people do this and you all do that. As soon as you do that, the very people that you're going to need to be part of the solution now see themselves as part of the problem. And those people who know that they didn't do anything in particular do not want that guilt or that responsibility. And you will find that they will exit the conversation. When there are good people who really do not support that kind of behavior in any form or fashion, but if you isolate them in the way that you respond, you will not get the very thing that we need most, and that's inclusive solutions. So you have to be thoughtful about how you respond to those things. And yes, it is true that in the moment we may get very upset and the emotions and all of that may be flaring, but you've got to back up, particularly as an African American child or parent, to think about, how do I want this to end? And however you want it to end has to be the way that you begin the process. A lot of times we respond and don't think about what the end result is going to be.
That's a very interesting point, because you think about a lot of times when there are discussions, when major things happen, and the response from Caucasians a lot of times is, it's not my fault, I didn't do it,
right.
And they throw their hands up and back away from it, as opposed to trying to make it better or trying to help to make it better. And I hadn't thought about that whole idea of the victim, if you will, setting the tone for how it's going to be dealt with.
And some people feel like it's a very unfair responsibility, because as the victim, really, you deserve to just have people rally there for you, to your support, in order to ensure that you are okay. But you have to, and that's the component that I think that you're touching on here so importantly, that there's a different way that we have to do things as African Americans. There is a reality that we exist inside of. And because that reality includes a lot of blame and misplaced responsibility and people who did this and who should have done that and why didn't you say this, and just there's a lot that goes on with that is very sensitive for a lot of people. We know that conversations on race are very sensitive conversations because there's so many deep-rooted feelings. But if you want to engage people in the process, you have to invite them in terms of, President Obama said it best when he was doing the Selma speech. He said the most powerful word in the English language is we. If we want to solve the issues that we are experiencing, then we cannot have a conversation that is you versus me. The conversation has to be, we have to rise above this. We are better than this behavior, so that the very people that you're going to need to change feel like they're invited into that in a way that is not judgmental, that you're not already making them guilty of something that they themselves had nothing to do with. They don't have any control over the fact that they happen to be born white. It doesn't instantly make them the oppressor because they are white. You are not the oppressor until you participate in oppressive behavior. So we have to be careful that we don't make people guilty of something before they have the chance to be able to be a part of that conversation.
Let me throw the phone numbers out, and then I want to come back to a point. No problem. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking about parenting, particularly the issues that African American parents have to deal with, the realities that they have to deal with. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So usually small children, little kids, until I guess around preschool age, when they start learning their colors, in my experience at least, that's when my daughter first brought up that she noticed a difference between the white kids that were in her class at Friends School and herself.
Absolutely.
So what kinds of conversations as a parent should you have with the various generations so that you are able to instill the right balance, if you will?
I understand exactly what you're saying. It's the different but not deficient conversation. Because what is going to be told, or what we fear, of course, being told to our children, is that they're different somehow makes them deficient. And we have to make sure that we're very clear in the conversations that we have with our children that you are, in fact, different. That is true. Your packaging is different. If I wrap this present in purple packaging, it is different on the outside than the present that's wrapped in blue packaging. But if we unwrap those presents, if there is a baseball in one and a baseball in other, the inside is the same. But make no mistake, the outside does look different in very simple ways that make them recognize that that packaging, which is all that is really different about us. If you look at the science, 99.9% of all of the genetics that exist within us, the DNA, the cells, the whole 9 yards, virtually identical. So the thing that's distinguishing us is something that is so minute. So teaching our kids in simple ways early on that lots of people make decisions based on the minute thing that they can see. But it does not change the fact that the things that are most valuable about us are the stuff on the inside. And most of that is very similar. But not everybody's mommy and daddy teaches them that same thing. So recognizing that there are going to be differences so that you don't set your child up for this euphoric world where everybody sees things as if we're in this colorless world. I don't think there's anything wrong with seeing color. I think that there's something wrong when you treat people differently because of the color you see. But there is nothing wrong with admitting that you see color. When people say to me, I don't see color, I think that's ridiculous. Because what that means is if I get lost, you can't even describe what I look like to have me found. Now, let's be honest. You could describe me. So you do see my color, but what you're trying to say is I don't treat anybody differently because of color. I love colorlessly. And that's the world we're trying to get to, that it is perfectly okay to have the different colors and the different cultures. It's what makes America great. But that with that different coloring and cultures or exteriors, people make judgments connected to those. Mm-hmm. And let's be prepared that because there are some that will, here's how we respond to those some. But we are not those some, so that we don't add that unnecessary burden to our kids, because they don't have to carry that.
You have a son.
I do.
That you're raising. He's older, so let's talk about teenager and young adult for this section. But when you look at just this week, in terms of all the things that have happened that have a racial overtone to them, everything from the gentleman being hung in Mississippi, what happened at UVA, the fraternity recently, all those different kinds of things. What kind of conversation then, as mommy and daddy, do you have with that son, particularly because Black men have that, there is a stigma around Black men in particular, so that he doesn't become jaded?
Absolutely. Well,
in other words, does that conversation change as they get older, or are there just different coping mechanisms, perhaps?
Well, I would say that I think the greatest service we do as parents is to be as sincere and honest as we could possibly be from the beginning. Now, what that sincerity may sound like and include may be different as they develop. So I don't tell different stories to my kids depending upon what age they are. It's just the details that I add to those stories are different. So when, as I mentioned before about talking about the different packaging, you can have it in those simple terms when they're that young. But by the time you're talking about getting to middle school and they're really seeing some of the social and racial cultural dynamics, now you can talk about where did those differences come from? What was the history behind those differences? Why do some people feel superior to others? Why do people struggle with insecurity about having darker skin? Where does that come from? So I can talk about the realities in a historical context for my son, a social historical context. I like to have him watch things that allow for conversation about that so that the things that matter to him, he brings up. Because sometimes the things that we give to our kids are not even the things that they're really interested in. They're not even the things that would really even bother our children because they have different personalities from us. They have had different social experiences than we have. So they may not even be hung up on some of the things that we would be hung up on. So sometimes it's good to sit down and just mutually view the same thing. And when you watch what your kids ask questions about, you'll discover that the thing that you were hot about, they didn't even care. So don't make stuff that's not their stuff, their stuff.
Kind of like when you have the talk when the little child says, "Mommy, where the babies come from," and you give them the whole
And they didn't
medical
really want all
explanation,
that.
and all they wanted to know.
All I wanted to know is, was it the stork?
Exactly.
Or is it a mommy and daddy?
Daddy.
That's all I needed to know today. And it's true.
Yeah.
Don't give them
I don't
more.
mean to make light of it, but
I
it's
know,
that same point.
it's that same concept.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to know what they want to know. And it's not to say that we don't have to equip them sometimes with a few things on the periphery. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that answer what it is that they care about. Find out what it is that they're concerned about and respond to those things.
Okay, our phone lines are lit up. Marita calls us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Marita, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely.
I am enjoying and learning so much from your speaker today.
Oh, thank you.
Oftentimes
Thanks, Marita.
at 12 on Friday, I am in the car listening. I enjoy hearing the perspectives, but today your speaker is right on, so intelligent. I am learning so much. I appreciate you being on the show.
Oh,
thank you.
Marita.
Do you have a question about child rearing at all that you'd like to ask?
Child rearing?
Yes.
Well, actually, I do not have a question. I'm going to preface my comment by saying I am a white person.
That's okay.
But I have an open mind, and I am always willing to learn what would be the solution, like Obama says, which I voted for him twice. And if he were running again, I would vote for him 2 more times. The answer to this is we.
Yes.
That's
yes.
the bottom line. We're
Absolutely.
all in this life together.
Absolutely. Thank you
Absolutely.
so much for your call, Marita. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
I
Take
love
care.
it.
And
Thank
you
you.
can also stream us online if you want to get out of your car.
Yes.
We're at anotherviewradio.org. Thanks so much for the call. We appreciate that. So Marita says,
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that because that is so true. Thank you so much for that, Marita. And it's so important that when we have conversations, that they are invitations. And too often, they are shut doors.
Mm-hmm.
You are not invited into this space because you are different. You don't understand. You haven't been through what I've been through. But we get so much more accomplished when we invite people in and say, hey, let's talk about where we have been.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience and your experiences may be very different experiences, but we may come from the same place of wanting us all to have great experiences.
Exactly.
But we can't shut doors just because we have different packaging.
Absolutely. Brian joins us from Chesapeake. Hi, Brian. You're on the air.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Doing okay. How are you?
Pretty good. While I'm listening to the show, I'm thinking about my wife's comments. She's been a teacher now in the Virginia Beach school system for about 20 years. Currently, she teaches in the largest elementary school in the system, and she has taught several grade levels. And the one thing that I hear in that particular school has highest rate of single parent and minority children, and also military children. And there's a lot of turnover, and it's always challenging for new teachers as well as old teachers. And the one thing that I hear every year when she starts is, the first week about how she has to teach kids respect. It's a bedrock foundation of, any child of any color going to school is respect for each other, respect for each other's opinions, respect for each other's things and space. And she just can't say it enough. And I have to, always act as if it's the first time I'm hearing it, and yes, dear, because I would be foolish not to. But that's one thing that I think that all parents really need to. It needs to start at home and not at school.
Absolutely. Let Alvean respond to you. Thanks so much for your call, Brian. Respect.
Absolutely.
And I've heard that from other teachers and stuff,
of course.
too.
And I spent, before, my current life as a relationship expert and the media stuff, I spent several years, I was a school counselor for years. So my background is in psychology and counseling. And then I also did training for several years in terms of closing academic achievement gaps by increasing parent engagement, working with Title I in the city of Hampton, and had some very similar experiences. I know exactly what Brian is referring to for the teachers, from the teacher's perspective, because teachers find themselves raising students as opposed to just educating them. And depending upon where you are in terms of your social and economic strata, you may find that you're doing more raising than you are educating for various reasons. Now, to Brian's point about the importance of teaching respect, there are a couple of things that are very important to have conversation about surrounding that. A, culturally speaking, what respect looks like in one environment may be very different than what it looks like in another environment. And when you come down the socioeconomic ladder, respect isn't something that is often given. You have to earn it. So if I come from an environment that you have to prove to me that you are worthy of my respect because it is a more survival, anytime you're talking about lesser opportunities, lesser exposures, anytime you're talking about what comes with poverty or lower socioeconomics, which is scarcity, you recognize that there is competition for whatever limited resources are available. So that is part of the fabric that's going to exist in that environment. And whenever there's limited resources, there's competition for those limited resources, which means that the strongest, the toughest generally survives. Well, in order to do that then means that you have to prove that I should give you that respect, that honor, that due. So there's a different orientation often that comes with those, because it's not really about black or white. It's more about socioeconomics. But because that socioeconomics often leans in such a way that African Americans are disproportionately represented at that lower socioeconomic level, people mistakenly assume that it is a black thing when in fact it is a green thing that we're really talking about. Mm-hmm. So the next thing that I would want to say about that, so considering context is very important. And then the next thing that I would want to say is that children, as you come down that ladder, relationship becomes even more important. Excuse me, I have to cough. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, relationship becomes even more important. Kids pay attention to how they feel about you, how they feel about the experience before you get them fully engaged in the experience. So it becomes even more important that you develop strong relationships with those students, that they know that you care about them before you care about what you're putting in them.
Okay. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. If you're just joining us, we're talking about parenting African American style with parent educator, marriage and family consultant, and relationship expert Alvean Lyons. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. I'm going to keep talking a little bit and let Alvean get over her coffee fit, and I understand because those allergies, I have them too. Believe
Goodness
me.
gracious, I apologize.
But since we're on the topic of education and respect and so forth, this week in Norfolk, the superintendent we just found out is leaving. That's yet another disruption in terms of leadership for Norfolk Public Schools. Unfortunately, Norfolk Public Schools has the lowest standardized test rating in the state. Right. If you are a parent and you care about your child, and from a socioeconomic perspective, you cannot do anything but send your child to what they call failing school or within a failing school system, what can you do as a parent then to still help your child succeed?
And that's such a tough situation to be in, and sometimes there's a real feeling of powerlessness in the midst of all of that. So what I'm going to say is not always going to feel so great to every parent, because you want to know that you send your kids to school and that in the vast majority of the educational experience, the teacher is providing that for your child. But unfortunately, when you're in a situation like that, you have to take on a lot of that responsibility yourself. When you're in an environment that you know that your children are not getting the adequate academic support that they're going to need, it does mean that when you're at home, how you use that time at home is going to become increasingly more important. So utilizing, and the nice thing about technology is that there are so many resources online now that you can use, and almost everyone has a smartphone and internet access. And I can honestly say that virtually everyone, no matter what level you're at when we're talking about socioeconomics, okay, because smartphones are purchased more by people at lower socioeconomic levels than they are for some of the wealthy. So we do have access, but it's a matter of what you're going to do with your access. You now have to change. Instead of going online to look at YouTube and various videos that really aren't doing much of anything, now you're going to have to take that time to use tutorials online to be able to learn the material that your child is learning in school so that you can be that academic support at home. I know that's a lot, particularly when you have a lot going on as it is. You're working long hours. You're doing everything you can possibly do just to make ends meet. So the idea of having to become your child's teacher on top of that does feel a bit overwhelming. But unfortunately, when you're in an experience like that, your child is who you're trying to save. And what parent is willing to let their child drown? And we would do anything. Many of us, and unfortunately in the African American community, many of us don't swim. But if we saw our child in trouble in the water, we would jump in even though we can't swim. The same thing is true when it comes to academics. When our kids are struggling at school, we have to be willing to jump in that water even if we are not sure that we can swim. There are so many mechanisms by which we can get the support we need to be able to help support our kids, but we have to do it.
All right, let's take another call. I think that's Lisa joining us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Lisa, you're on the air.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. Your guest was talking about explaining to children how they're different. And I really have to ask, different from what? When I was growing up, my parents, they were mixed couple, but it was never explained to me that I was different. I was unique. I was unique just as each individual is unique. And I was always taught that, don't judge a person by their cover, that you need to judge a person by their character. And their character is what you see when they don't know that you're looking. And the other important thing that I was always asked, where does it start and where does it end?
Okay. We'll let Alvean respond to that. Lisa is her name.
Wonderful. Lisa, I appreciate what it is that you're sharing. And contextually speaking, I was talking about the idea that different does not mean deficient, because lots of times, particularly these days, and I gathered from your eloquence that you're an adult at this point. So some things have shifted a bit in terms of the way in which kids communicate. And unfortunately, when we start talking about the pervasiveness of bullying by virtue of multiple things, the slightest things that are different, what your parents can afford to put on your feet versus what my parents buy, where I go and hang out versus where you can afford to go and hang out. And the list goes on and on. So different comes up a lot in terms of the way young people communicate with one another. And it's important that when different comes up, people recognize different not as deficient, so that different is seen as something very positive and, to your point, unique. But it's all in the language in which we communicate about it, because different isn't a bad thing at all. It's what makes us unique and fantastic and unusual and one of a kind. All of those things are great things, but it is how we communicate about those things that we determine whether or not is that good that I'm different or is that bad that I'm different. So the conversation is really about different not being deficient, but rather that it is what makes us fantastic as a United States.
Okay, Tiffany joins us from Chesapeake. Hi, Tiffany, you're on the air.
Hi, how are you?
Doing good. How are you?
Great.
Good.
Love your show.
Thank you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, I have a question. I'm an African-American mother, and I have raised one interracial son, and I have a 2-year-old interracial son. And y'all were talking about earlier how you have to explain things from a different view for African-American children. Why is there some way you do that for interracial children that happen to be male?
That's a great question, Tiffany. Go ahead.
I
Alvean.
love that question, Tiffany. Okay, well, here's the thing. And I remember in an interview that was done with Halle Berry several years ago, Halle was talking about the experience with her mom, and her mom saying to her that though I may be white and 50% of you is white, the fact is the world looking at you is going to see you as African American. So I would be doing you a disservice to raise you as if you're going to have the same social experiences as I am going to have. So she made a point of exposing Halle to various things that would be typical within the African American culture. So Halle knew how to navigate those spaces. Whatever she decides to do with her life as she became older was totally her choice. But her mom did not want her ill-equipped for the differences that exist in the way that people orient or will orient to her. Same thing being true about President Obama. We never talk about the 50% of him that is white. All we talk about is the first black president, which I find a bit disrespectful to his mom and his grandparents, who were the only people who were actively part of raising him. But yet, because of his rapping, we have completely erased the love that made him successful, made him, regardless of what your political position is, what he has achieved is worthy of acknowledgement. Many of us don't ever get to become president of the United States. So the people who were behind you to help that happen were beautiful, vanilla people who loved you dearly and believed in you. But because you look like an African American, people have literally erased these wonderful parents and grandparents, which I think is totally disrespectful. But the reality is that in our America, people judge you based on what you look like. So when you are parenting African American children, you must equip them with what the reality is going to be, not based on your love, because your love is going to be colorless. They're your babies. Right. But when they leave your house, they are not everybody else's babies. So recognizing that there's certain things in certain ways they may have to carry themselves a little bit differently, because African American males in particular are often, as we see in the news, are often perceived as evil, dangerous. Somehow they have nefarious intent when they're just walking down the street, minding their business. I mean, just if we go down the list, they have become, the hunted in our society, which is a scary notion for parents of African American boys, regardless of what complexion we're talking about. So making sure that your boys understand that it is not okay. Do not wear your pants sagging, because people are going to assume things. When you are wearing certain outfits, recognize that how that is seen on Cody is different than how it's going to be seen on Jamal. They may be wearing the same tracksuit, but Jamal looks like he might have been running from something. Cody looks like he's headed to track practice. It's amazing the scripts that are added just based on perception. So telling Jamal that you have to understand, baby, that when you're walking down the street, honey, look like you have someplace to go. Don't look like you're just loitering around. You need to look like you have some purposeful intent here. When you have music in your ears, everybody else doesn't need to hear the music. You don't have to play your music for the entire world, because there are assumptions that come with that. When you're driving a car, you don't need to have your windows rolled down, and nobody needs to hear the N-word coming off of or coming out of your car because you're playing your music so loud, and you think that because it's your car in your space that you pay for, that somehow you can do whatever you want. But understand, that is not how people are responding to you.
It's a lot to it. Mark joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Mark. You're in the air.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm enjoying the conversation.
Thank you.
Look, the information is, ideal and right on point from a singular parental household. But my concern is is that all of our children have to exist in the whole society. And the issue is that we have a deficit that is about a generation and a half gone. I would say definitely hits us a little bit harder in the African American community. And I just want to know if your guests had any suggestions or strategies. How, as a community, can we fill that gap? Because once the parenting is gone, I mean, we're talking about grandparents that are 35 and 36 years old. So we can't bring that back. So in order to strengthen the whole, what is the strategy, or what are some of the things that, from a community perspective, that we can do to fill these gaps to make sure that most of all of our children really have a real shot at gaining some levels of achievement in their lifetime?
Mark, thanks so much for that call, and I'm going to let Alvean answer.
That is a fantastic question.
That's a great question.
A fantastic question, Mark. And I think that the answer to that is the notion that we are the parents of our community. What has happened to us as we've, people call it, progressed, but not everything has been progress. Okay. So when we became more individualistic, we only began to care about what was going on with our kids in our house. So when our next door neighbor does not have a father in the home or does not have a mother in the home, because we have some wonderful single fathers out there. So I do not want it to be suggested that African American males do not step up to the plate and take care of their children, because there are fantastic men out there that do that every single day and don't get enough attention. So I need to make that point. But secondarily, when we see ourselves as part of the whole and all of these children are our children, then when we watch some teenagers, we can't be afraid of our teenagers when we're walking in the mall. If you see teenagers, particularly if it's one or two, because you do get the pack mentality if you get 12 of them together. But you see one or two teenagers being unnecessarily loud, and you know that it's only a matter of time before somebody's going to say something to someone, and this innocent situation turns into something that is perceived as not innocent. You can go up to those teenagers and say, "Here, brother, young brother, baby," because everybody's baby to me. So when I see teenagers out in the street, baby, you cannot make that kind of noise and think that people are going to respond positively to that. Listen, y'all can have a good time. You can laugh, and that is okay. But you don't have to be so loud about it that people are wondering whether or not this laughter is going to turn into something a little mischievous a second.
People are afraid, Alvean, to that village, to be the village. I mean, you think about it because you don't know how people are going to react and so forth. But I have to wonder, even in past generations, somebody was afraid to, but folks got the courage to step up and to do it anyway.
Well, you hear old stories all the time where kids, if they acted up, they were scared to walk home because they're going to get in trouble 5 houses before they get home.
Exactly.
That's when we were a community, and we did a better job when we saw ourselves as responsible for our children. And when I say our, I don't just mean African American children. I mean our children of our community altogether. Because my kids and your kids may look totally different, but if they play together, they influence each other. So what's happening with your children, whether they're chocolate, vanilla, or butter pecan, it is important that we all care about what's going on. We're not going to fix what's happening in our community until we see it as our community. But too often we see it as my house inside a community rather than our community. And the solutions rest in a collective approach to making a difference.
I'm going to try to get another call. I think we got about 4 minutes left. Okay. Lisa, which call? We're going to Martha in Newport News. Hi, you're on the air.
Barbara, I miss you on TV, you and Kathy Lewis, okay?
Oh, thank you.
I'm here sitting in the car with my husband. We're hungry, getting ready to eat, and heard you guys. I thought, oh, my God. And Alvean, I didn't know how to spell your name, but I just looked you up. I think I'm in love, okay? You are wonderful. Oh, my God. I'm in love.
Well, I love you too, Martha. I haven't even met you yet, and I love you already.
I'm 75. My husband is 80, and I'm a Democrat, okay? And I recently discovered Facebook, and I've been reading a lot of the Allen West Post and the at right-wing news, and I get so angry at some of the horrible things that they say, the people who write things, and I just get, excuse my French, pissed as much as them as they're being. And then sometimes but now they have a lot of this stuff on the other side, the Democrats, and I've been reading their stuff, and it's just as horrible as, so what's happened is I've become a lot more fair in my way of thinking, and before I react and say something just as snarky, I hold back and bite my tongue, and each day I try to say something positive, especially to someone who's, I think, is being horrible, okay?
Oh,
and not just to be like, not hypocritically, I mean, really mean it, be sincere about it.
Right.
Okay.
But listening to you guys, I am so impressed. So anyone who does not know about you guys, I'm going to write you. I have never, where they ask you on Facebook, what do you have to say? I never have anything. I always respond to somebody else. Well, besides, one day I got very angry, and I thought, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me, because
there
I
you
was
go.
Really
Marcia, I hate to cut you off, but we've got less than 2 minutes, and I want to try to get one more call in. But we so appreciate you calling in, and we appreciate you being a fan.
You can send me messages, Marcia.
Absolutely. We really appreciate
website.
that. Thank you so much. Alvean, we got less than 2 minutes. I want to let you kind of button this for us in terms of parenting. I want us to not be afraid to parent our children.
Absolutely.
Individually, and our children collectively.
Absolutely. And I will say that ultimately what we want, all of us want the same things. We go about it different ways, and we have to equip our children sometimes in different ways. But it's for the same things. We want the same things. We want them to be able to navigate that sea socially, emotionally, and academically. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are engulfing them in the most positive things we can possibly give them. We want to be the fuel to their success, making sure that our baggage doesn't become their baggage, but simultaneously making sure that they're aware that are people that do have baggage, and that their stuff doesn't have to be your stuff, but recognize how you may have to interact with it in order to be successful navigating through it and over it. But there's a beautiful quote that I love that I just want to end with. And it's just, and Bishop Jake says that a ship does not sink because of the water it sits in. It sinks because of the water that gets inside of it. We in our community have to make sure that as we're parenting our children, we teach them how to navigate the water that they sit in, but we make sure that we don't get water inside of them because of the things that we've been through that makes it such that the very ship we don't want our baby sinking.
Wow. That is so powerful. Alvean Lyons, our favorite relationship expert, parent, educator.
Oh,
thank you so much. And we're going to see you in another couple months, hopefully on the air, or several weeks, actually.
And tell them, check me out on my website, alveanlyons.com.
Absolutely.
To find out all the parenting things we're doing.
Absolutely. And we'll be right back.
I'm with Marcellus, and you all are checking out Another View on WHRV 89.5. Don't go anywhere. Check us out.
Historians agree that television was a major catalyst for change during the civil rights movement. If you were not personally marching or protesting, you could experience what was happening during the evening news. The Commonwealth of Virginia was anything but silent when it came to the movement. Virginia's NAACP filed more lawsuits than any other state, and students at the Norfolk Division of Virginia State College, known today as Norfolk State University, joined forces with college students from all across the Commonwealth to speak out against segregation. Our Lisa Godley has the story.
We shall not be moved.
The year was 1960, and college students throughout the South were taking a stand against racism. Students attending the Norfolk Division of Virginia State College, now Norfolk State University, were among them. Sandra Finner was a sophomore at Norfolk State, majoring in history at the time.
I remember us being trained. Our leader was Milton Gay, and we had to go through this nonviolent participation course. And we did that for several days on the weekends and before we went out to sit at the lunch counters. You had people getting into your face, calling you the N-word and just about spitting on you and that type of thing. And they told you what to expect and how to react or not to react.
Fenner says they targeted the lunch counters at 3 5 and dime stores in Norfolk, including Woolworths.
I can say I remember going in and just people were expecting us to come in. And once we got in and sat at the lunch counter, they stood around and people stood behind us. And then they told us they were closing down the lunch counters. I remember Woolworth had chairs with backs on them, and they put a rope through each chair and closed the lunch counter down.
Much like a year earlier when the Norfolk 17 walked through the doors of several Norfolk public schools, the world watched. NSU professor Gwendolyn Farr was a student at Booker T. Washington High School at the time, but she says the movement was in the news and on her mind.
Between television, the Journal and Guide, the Virginian Pilot, and just being around older adults who had gone through a lot of things and were making comparisons for us in terms of why it was so important that things would change. And they kept us cognizant in the church and outside of the church. And I remember looking at, the March on Washington on television and things like that. And our conversations got more adult in terms of the fact that we were looking at what were the types of things that we would have to deal with once we graduated from high school.
What she would face was a city struggling with change. Black churches around Norfolk rallied, many inviting guest speakers who encouraged the membership to get more involved in the fight to turn things around.
Norfolk State University played a significant role, just like the Black Church. Dr. Milton Reed, who was a key minister in this area and was also a board member of SCLC, one of the lieutenants, Dr. King.
Dr. William Ward came to NSU as the co-chair of the history department in the late 1960s. He watched as students decided how they would take part in the movement.
Some had attended the March on Washington in '63. Some had become lawyers, and some had become community leaders. On campus, those young men returning from the war certainly had fought for the American ideal. They returned home to a time when the American ideal was not there for them. So they were more aggressive.
Norfolk State University recently hosted a forum to look at the role the university and Norfolk area churches played in the civil rights movement. Dr. April Manalang, who works in the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies at NSU, coordinated the event in hopes of creating awareness, particularly among young people.
I think maybe all of us can identify with this notion that the history that we learned growing up did not cover these stories. They've been marginalized and pushed out to the edges.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of reclaiming them and then really illuminating them so that our students, our NSU students now, our communities to come for the future, will understand those important contributions that we have made collectively.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And that does it for this edition of Another View. Hey, if you missed something in today's show that you'd like to hear again, go onto our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. Sign up for our eView newsletter, a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows, and we're on Facebook, and would love it if you'd like us. Next week, I have the honor and pleasure as chair of the Board of Commissioners for Norfolk Redevelopment and Housing Authority to serve as MC for the retirement celebration of the CEO, Mr. Cheryl Montgomery. So our very own Lisa Godley will host Another View on Health with co-host Dr. Keith Newby. They'll talk about stress and heart disease. Our theme music was produced and composed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Kamaria Mason answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Make it a fabulous weekend, everyone. And let's get together again next Friday at noon for Another View.